And I found myself saying, okay, well, yeah, I'll spend time with God when things are a little more calm. I'll spend time with God after I finish this other stuff, and so on and so forth. And I went through a major season of my life in which I had shoved relationship with God out of the picture so that I could focus on the work that God wanted me to do. What's up, guys? I'm Nate. Here's today's topic. How can we be focused more on God than on obligation to God? This is actually a question I got over at my Instagram account at @DeclareTruth, but it's also a question that I've encountered a lot just in normal conversation and interaction with people who are trying to follow Jesus in their lives. That tension, I think, between the relationship and the obligation, the knowing and connecting with God and the doing things that God asks us to do, that's not a new tension. That's been going on since Jesus and before the time of Jesus. If you think of the Pharisees, they were a group that, not all of them, but many of them, Jesus called out for handling that tension poorly, for neglecting the connection with God part, for neglecting the heart of the reason behind the obligations and focusing more on the obligations themselves, almost as an end as opposed to a means to an end. So the question is, how do we strike that balance? How do we live our lives for God while at the same time not becoming so caught up in doing the things of God that we lose sight of God Himself? How do we keep our eyes on the point, on the reason for all this, and not just the things surrounding the reason? That's the question. See, and I think the key here is the word relationship. The key is the fact that constantly throughout the Bible, God describes His relationship to us as that of a parent and as a friend and as a lover even. In other words, He's reaching down into our world and using language that we're familiar with in order to make a point. That relationship with Him, in many ways, not in all ways, but in many ways, is very similar to our relationships with other people. See, this is because God designed us in His image. He designed us with many similarities to Him because that's how He wanted His creation to be. That was the kind of relationship He wanted with us. But because of that, there are things that we can take from our understanding of what it means to have a healthy, functional, consistent relationship with other people and apply it to our relationship with God. So I want you guys to think with me about that romantic relationship metaphor that God uses many times in Scripture. Think about a romantic relationship. Think about a marriage relationship even. With that kind of connection, right, there's a lot of intimacy, there's a lot of depth, there's a lot of knowing one another. But it's a very common misconception with people who have not had any kind of functional long-term relationship with another person like that those things are just self-sustaining. In other words, that relationships like that don't require any work, that they just work or they don't. And that if it doesn't work, well, then you're gonna split up and it's not gonna function. But if it does work, you're just made for each other and everything is gonna be easy and everything is gonna be breezy and you're never gonna have to suffer or try really hard to make anything happen or work in the relationship because it's just meant to be. And that is not the way relationships work. Those of you who are married know that is not how relationships work. That's not how God designed relationships to work. When you have two people that are separate in their perception, that are separate in their individuality, it's going to take serious work to form meaningful connection. My wife and I have been married for 10 years as of this last June. And what we have learned is that if we want our relationship to grow and to be consistent and to be healthy and to be beneficial to ourselves and to other people, it takes intentionality and it takes investing into each other and it takes forcing ourselves to do things that sometimes we don't feel like we want to do, sometimes we don't have the emotional backing for, but things that we know need to be done in order to spend time with each other and talk with each other and understand each other and connect with each other. See, that's work sometimes. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's out of joy, and most of the time even it's out of joy, but sometimes it takes sacrifice. And that's a sacrifice worth making for a relationship that is worth investing in and worth living out. In other words, relationship doesn't always come naturally. There are a lot of people I've talked to who view the idea of having to sacrifice or work at a relationship as being a sign that the relationship isn't meant to be. That's simply not how relationships are. Nobody who's been in any kind of long-term, consistent relationship would say that it's easy all the time. Your relationship with people and your relationship with God can't just be based on your emotional state in the moment. It can't just be based on whether you feel like you want to spend time with that person, whether you feel like you want to invest in them. It has to be based on a commitment to do what needs to be done to see that relationship grow and flourish. And when we apply this idea to what we're talking about with relationship with God versus obligation to God, the issue is that we get so wrapped up in the work of God and the work of Christianity that becomes our focus and that becomes our priority as opposed to God Himself. It's doing the work of Christianity without looking at the heart of Christianity, doing the work of God while ignoring the God for whom that work is valuable in the first place. And when we do the work of Christianity without the relationship, that's what we call soulless religion. That's what we call religion for religion's sake. That's what we call obligation that ends at obligation. And the same exact thing is true of relationships with people. If you just do all of the chores around the house and just do tasks for one another, that's not the same thing as a connection. That's not the same thing as time spent together, and it's soulless duty. It's soulless responsibility. That's not something that thrives a relationship. That's not something that grows connection or intimacy. See, and in my own life, I've seen this play out too many times. A handful of years ago, I was working as a pastor at a church in South Florida, and I found myself so busy because there was so much work to be done, and it was good work. There were people that needed to be connected with. There were sermons that needed to be prepared. There was so much to do. And I found my schedule being so crammed full of God work, of good stuff, that I began to shove my own investment into my relationship with God to the side. And I found myself saying, okay, well, yeah, I'll spend time with God when things are a little more calm. I'll spend time with God after I finish this other stuff, and so on and so forth. And I went through a major season of my life in which I had shoved relationship with God out of the picture so that I could focus on the work that God wanted me to do. I was taking the point out of it and focusing on just the peripheral things. Now, that work was good, right? That's valuable work. We know that doing things like reading your Bible and connecting with people and serving people, going to church, all that stuff, that there's value in that, right? But it's not the point in and of itself. Those things are means to an end and not the end in and of themselves. See, the point is Jesus. And I had begun to shove Jesus out of the picture to make more room for the work. And after a handful of months of that, I was so burnt out. I was so frustrated. I was so ready to just call it quits with the entire ministry. And no wonder, because I had taken the point out of it. And no longer is it something that's being done out of love. No longer is it something that I'm doing out of connection with my Savior. Now it's just soulless responsibility. It's religion for religion's sake. And it took me really getting some perspective to get my life back on track. It took me remembering what the entire point is, to start moving other things out of the way and saying, okay, anything else can be sacrificed, but not the person. I can sacrifice the work I do around the house if it means connecting with my wife, connecting with my children. And in the same way with the story of Martha and Mary, you guys remember that from the Bible, where one is so focused on the work and preparing a nice environment for the person, while the other sees the value in the person himself. And we have to be very intentional, I think, not to get so caught up in the good stuff that we forget the purpose of all of that we forget the point of all of that. See, in Jeremiah, God says that out of anything a human being could boast about, He doesn't want us to boast in our strength or in our riches or in our wisdom, but that the thing above all other things that a man or a woman could boast about, it is knowing God. That's what God says. Out of all of our achievements in life, the thing that is more worthy of honor, more worthy of boasting about, if anything is, it is knowing God. It is connecting with Him. It's beginning to see His heart. It's walking in intimacy with Him. See, that is the point of life. That is the point of everything we're doing. That is why we were born. That is why we live. It is to know our Creator, to be known by our Creator, and then to know the rest of His incredible creation that He has designed for us. So how do we become more focused on God than focused on obligation? How do we not lose the point in the midst of doing all of the good, valuable work that comes with being a follower of Jesus? See, I think there's a lot of different answers we can give here. And many, many people throughout the years have provided a wonderfully abundant amount of answers for how we can keep our eyes set on Jesus and not just the work of Jesus, set on God and not just the work He gives for us. But I can give you guys my own experience and what worked for me. Because back in that period of life, when I had shoved Jesus out of the picture to make more room for work and for ministry, when I began to burn out, I got a real reality check, and I felt like God said to me, you need to get your priorities in order or you're going to lose it. And when I got that perspective, when I began to see again that I had lost the point of all of the good work that I was doing, it was a real struggle at first. Because I said, okay, I've lost the point of all this. I have to prioritize God, but I've got so much work to do. I've got such an incredibly packed schedule. How am I going to fit God into all of that? And for me, it was as simple as saying, all right, if He is the most important thing I could be spending my time on, then I've got to give Him the first spot. And what I began to do was very simply wake up 15 minutes earlier each day. Get into my work 15 minutes before I needed to every day. And I began to spend the first 15 minutes of each day, the first 15 minutes of my work day, journaling out my thoughts in a prayer to God, sitting and meditating on them and meditating on God's response back to me. Having that time of nothing but focusing on me and God, and that's it, nothing else. There's no other agenda. And it was that short little 15 minutes every single day. But I made time for it every single day because 15 minutes is not much. It's easy to fit in right at the beginning. And I began to do that for weeks and for months, and that 15 minutes began to grow and grow and grow, and everything about my life began to change at a fundamental level because I had gotten the point of all of it back. And suddenly everything else gained its relevance and significance and meaning again. That's what it was for me. It was finding that consistency in which I did something that had nothing to do with all of the tasks that needed to be done and everything to do with investing into my relationship with God. So am I saying that everybody needs to spend the first 15 minutes of their day journaling? No, I'm not. See, not everybody can spend the first 15 minutes of their day doing that. And journaling isn't for everybody. It's the way it is. We're all different. And our relationships with God are all different. But there's two elements here I want you guys to take away from this. And here's the first. Each of us need to pick a time every day that works for you. To pick a time that works in your schedule every single day to invest in your relationship with God. Maybe for you, it's the first thing after waking up. Maybe it's that first part of your workday. Maybe it's right after you get off of work, or maybe it's right before bed, or right after your kids go to bed. But regardless of the time, it has to be something that you can do with consistency, because it's the consistency that's the key part here. So often, we try to leave our quiet times or devotional times to whenever they fit into our day, and that's just not how human beings are made to function. We're made as habitual creatures. We're made to thrive off of consistency at some level. And if there's anything that's worth investing in consistently, it's our relationships, and specifically our relationship with God. You know, and that idea of scheduled time in relationship with God or in a relationship with people might not seem romantic to you, might not seem exciting to you, but that's what it takes to grow something with consistency. We can't always just be led by what we feel like doing in the moment. See, that feeling of romance is an emotional thing. It's this emotional drive, and many of you guys understand this, but emotions can be there, and then they cannot be there. You can feel it, and then you cannot feel it in another instant. They come and they go. And we can't just leave relationships like that. Relationships with our spouse, relationships with our friends, and relationships with our God on our feelings that can come and go in an instant. They're so much more valuable than leading up to something that may be there and may not be there. They're worth investing in consistently. They're worth investing in even if it's something you don't feel like doing in the moment. So that's that first point, is pick a time that's gonna work for you to do every single day, whether you feel like it or not. So find a time for you that works every single day. And here's the second point. Find a way of connecting with God that works for you. Don't just take someone else's method and assume that it's right for your way of connecting with God. Experiment and find something that works for you, that brings you life, that speaks encouragement and challenge and uplifts you. See, for me, it's journaling, but for you, it could be something completely different. It took me experimenting with a handful of different things to really get the feel for what was going to work for me and my relationship with God, to find something that was going to challenge me and encourage me and grow my connection and my intimacy with God. And it could be a lot of different things. For some people, that's going on walks and just pouring out their hearts to God as they just walk around aimlessly. For some people, that's sitting in their Bible and reading and responding to God and reading and responding to God. For some people, that's sitting down in a dark room and just praying. I can't do that. I will fall asleep 10 times out of 10. But maybe that works for you. See, the point is, experiment and find something that is going to bring life to your relationship with God and bring life to you. Because each of us is designed for that relationship. Each of us is different, but each of us is designed for that relationship. And it's important that we realize that relationship with God is never in a box. That God is an infinite God, and He can meet us any way He wants to. There's no one right way to approach Him. He can be approached however He wants to be approached. And I don't think He's intimidated by our creativity and by our individuality, because He created us that way. So experiment and approach Him in a way that's going to bring you life. But the important part here is that it's quality time spent with God that we're after. It's time spent in His presence. It's time spent sharing your heart and taking the time to hear from His. So, number one, pick a time of day that is going to work for you every single day. That consistency is something that we cannot leave out of any relationship, but especially our relationship with God. And number two, experiment until you find a way of connecting with God that brings your relationship with Him life, that brings you life, because each of us are made different. And I don't think God is intimidated by our individuality. And I want to challenge you guys to do this as a daily practice. Put your money where your mouth is in saying that God is your focus, that God is your priority, and not just the work of God. See, we were created for this. We were created for connection with our God. We were created to not just keep our eyes on obligation, but to keep our eyes on Him. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. As always, I hope you found it encouraging and challenging and uplifting. And if you did, please consider sharing it with a friend who might need to hear this message. Also consider liking the video and subscribing, as every single Friday we'll have more videos just like this coming out. God bless you guys.